Nebraska, 1993. Jenna Walsh pulled her rusty Chevy into the driveway of her small rental house, the engine coughing as it shut off. 30. She was bone-tired, her waitress shift at the diner dragging past midnight. Her hands smelled of coffee and grease, and her back ached. But she forced a smile as she glanced at her son, Caleb, slumped in the passenger seat. The 8-year-old was half asleep, his baseball cap crooked, clutching a crumpled comic book. "Come on, kiddo," Jenna said, nudging him. "Time for bed." Caleb yawned, dragging his backpack as they headed inside. The house was cramped, with peeling paint and a couch that sagged in the middle, but it was home. Jenna tucked Caleb into his narrow bed, his room a mess of action figures and crayons. "School tomorrow?" she reminded him, kissing his forehead. He mumbled something about the playground, but she was too tired to catch it. Willow Creek was a sleepy town where everyone knew your name, and nothing much happened. It had a gas station, a diner, and a playground behind the elementary school. Its swings and slide faded from years of sun and wind. Jenna had grown up here, left for a few years, then came back after her divorce, scraping by to give Caleb a good life. The playground was Caleb's favorite spot. He'd spend hours there after school, climbing and laughing with his friends. But lately, he'd been quieter, sticking to the swings and avoiding the slide. The next morning, Jenna was sipping coffee at the kitchen table when Caleb shuffled in, his sneakers untied. "You okay, buddy?" she asked, noticing his frown. He poked at his cereal, not meeting her eyes. "The slide's weird," he said finally, his voice small. "It laughs." Jenna raised an eyebrow, setting her mug down. "Laughs? Like kids playing?" Caleb shook his head. "No, like it's inside the slide. Nobody's there, but I hear it." He looked up, his brown eyes wide. "It knows my name." A chill ran through Jenna, but she brushed it off. Kids had big imaginations, right? "Maybe it's the wind," she said, ruffling his hair. "Or those comics messing with your head. Come on, grab your bag." She drove him to school, the playground coming into view as they passed. The slide was old, its red paint chipped, the metal dented from years of use. It looked harmless, just a rusty relic in a dusty lot. But as Jenna glanced at it, the morning sun seemed to dim, and the slide's shadow stretched longer than it should, almost like a kid standing there. She blinked, and it was gone. Just a trick of the light, she told herself, pulling away. That evening, Jenna walked to the playground to pick Caleb up from after-school club. The air was cool, the sky turning orange as the sun dipped low. Kids were scattered across the swings and monkey bars, but Caleb sat alone on a bench, his backpack at his feet. The slide stood quiet, its tunnel dark. Jenna's stomach twisted as she noticed no kids were near it, not even the bold ones who usually raced to the top. "Hey!" she called, waving. "Ready to go?" Caleb nodded, but his eyes flicked to the slide. "It was laughing again," he whispered as they walked home. "Like it wants me to come closer." Jenna forced a laugh, her throat tight. "You're just tired, bud. Let's get some pizza, okay?" But as they left, she glanced back. The slide's shadow moved, just for a second, like someone was sliding down. No one was there. Her heart thudded, and she hurried Caleb along, telling herself it was nothing. That night, after Caleb was asleep, Jenna stood at the kitchen window, staring toward the school. The playground was too far to see, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching. She checked the locks, turned off the lights, and tried to sleep. But around 2 a.m., she woke to a sound, faint, like kids giggling, coming from outside. She grabbed a flashlight and stepped onto the porch, the beam shaking in her hand. The street was empty, the night silent. Then, from the direction of the playground, she heard it again. A soft, eerie laugh, like it was calling her name. Jenna didn't sleep much after that. The laugh stuck in her head, sharp and wrong, like a song she couldn't unhear. By morning, she was jittery, her coffee cold as she watched Caleb eat his toast. He looked pale, his eyes darting to the window. "Can I stay home today?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Jenna frowned. You sick? She touched his forehead, but he felt fine. It's the slide, he said, gripping his spoon. It keeps talking, says it misses me. Her stomach dropped. This wasn't just a kid's imagination anymore. Okay, she said, forcing calm. You can stay with Mrs. Larson next door, but we're figuring this out. After dropping Caleb off, Jenna called Mike, her old high school friend who fixed things around town. He was 32 with a scruffy beard and a pickup truck that rattled. You know anything about the playground? She asked when he stopped by, leaning against her kitchen counter. Mike shrugged, sipping a soda. It's old. Been there since the 70s. Folks say it's creepy, but kids still play there. He paused, scratching his neck. Heard a story once, though. Something about a fire at a factory nearby. Bunch of workers' kids died. Slide showed up after that, like a donation. Jenna's skin prickled. Caleb says it laughs. Calls his name. Mike's grin faded. That's weird. Want me to check it out? They headed to the playground, the midday sun doing little to warm the dusty lot. The slide loomed, this metal dull and scratched. Mike climbed to the top, peering into the tunnel. Looks normal, he called, but his voice wavered. Jenna stood at the base, her hands clammy. The air felt heavy, like before a storm, and the slide's shadow seemed to flicker, forming a small, hunched shape. She stepped back, heart racing. That afternoon, Jenna visited the town library, a squat building with flickering lights. She dug through old newspapers, her fingers smudging ink. A 1974 article caught her eye. A fire at a textile factory had killed 6 children in a daycare wing. The slide was donated by a worker, unnamed, who'd lost his daughter. No other details, but the photo showed the slide, brand new, its red paint gleaming. Jenna stared at it, her chest tight. The slide looked exactly the same now, not a day older. Back home, Caleb was drawing, his crayons scratching furiously. Jenna peeked over his shoulder and froze. His paper showed kids with big, empty eyes, smiling too wide, standing around a slide. Who are they? She asked, her voice shaking. The slide's friends, Caleb said, not looking up. They want me to play. Jenna snatched the drawing, her hands trembling. That night, she locked Caleb's door, something she'd never done. Around 1 a.m., she heard footsteps. She bolted upright, finding Caleb in the hallway, eyes glassy, heading for the front door. Caleb! She shouted, grabbing him. He blinked, confused, like he'd been sleepwalking. They're waiting, he mumbled, his voice small. The next day, Jenna and Mike went back to the playground with a crowbar. If it's creepy, we'll tear it down, Mike said, but his hands shook as he touched the slide. The metal was ice cold, even in the sun, and when Jenna leaned close, she heard it. A faint giggle, like kids hiding inside. She stumbled back, her breath short. Mike found an old box in the town hall basement, stuffed with factory records. Inside was a diary, its pages brittle, written by a man named Henry Cole. He'd lost his daughter, Ellie, in the fire. I gave them the slide, he wrote, a ritual to keep their spirits close. They'll play forever. The last page was frantic. They're angry. They want more. Jenna's blood ran cold. The slide wasn't just haunted, it was a trap. That night, she dreamed of kids with hollow eyes, their laughter echoing as they pulled her into a dark tunnel. She woke gasping, Caleb's voice drifting from his room. They're coming, Mom. The playground felt alive as Jenna and Mike stood before the slide. The sky bruised purple with dusk. Caleb was at Mrs. Larson's. Safe for now, but Jenna's heart pounded. The slide's tunnel was pitch black, and the giggles were louder, sharp, and hungry. We end this tonight, she said, clutching a flashlight. Mike nodded, his crowbar tight in his hands. If that diary's right, we break it, the spirits go. Right? Jenna wasn't sure, but they had no choice. She'd found a note in the diary about salt and fire, a way to free trapped souls. They poured a circle of table salt around the slide, the grains glinting under her flashlight. The air grew colder, the giggles turning to whispers. "Jenna, Caleb." She ignored them, her voice shaking as she read from the diary. "To the children of the fire, we're sorry. Your pain is done. Be free." The slide rattled, its metal groaning like it was alive. Mike swung the crowbar, denting the base, but the whispers became screams, high and piercing. Jenna's ears rang, but she kept reading, her hands slick with sweat. Then she saw him, Caleb, standing at the playground's edge, eyes blank. "No!" she shouted, dropping the diary. He walked toward the slide, arms limp, like he was pulled by strings. The tunnel glowed faintly, and shadows moved inside, small and twisted. Jenna ran, tackling Caleb just as he reached the ladder. He thrashed, his voice not his own. "Let me play!" Mike poured gasoline from a can, his face pale. "Burn it!" he yelled. Jenna dragged Caleb back, her arms burning from his struggle. She grabbed a lighter, flicking it with trembling fingers. The flame caught the gasoline, and the slide erupted in fire, the screams deafening. Shadows writhed in the flames, their shapes fading as the metal warped and buckled. Caleb went limp, sobbing in Jenna's arms. The fire died down, leaving a charred skeleton of the slide. The whispers stopped, the air warming. Jenna held Caleb tight, tears streaming down her face. They'd done it. The spirits were gone. A week later, the town bulldozed the playground, replacing it with a parking lot. Jenna and Caleb moved to a new apartment, leaving Willow Creek behind. Caleb was himself again, laughing and playing with his comics. Jenna started sleeping better, the giggles no longer haunting her dreams. But one night, as she unpacked boxes, she found Caleb's latest drawing under his bed. Kids with empty eyes, smiling around a slide. She burned it, her hands shaking. Late that night, she drove by the parking lot. The asphalt was smooth, empty. Then she heard it, a faint laugh like kids playing, rising from the ground. She sped away, telling herself it was nothing, but in her rearview mirror, the shadows seemed to dance. Tom Harper wiped sweat from his brow, the Oregon sun weak but relentless as he raked leaves at the Willow Park playground. It was 1987, and at 35, Tom was a fixture in the small town of Cedar Hollow, a widower who kept the park tidy and the kids safe. His pickup truck sat nearby, radio crackling with a faint country tune. The playground was old, its swings creaking, the slide pocked with rust. But it was the seesaw that bugged him lately, tilting unevenly even when no one sat on it. Kids called it heavy, avoiding it like it was bad luck. Tom figured it was just broken, but his daughter, Lily, 10 and sharp as a tack, swore she saw a boy on it at midnight, pale and still, staring at her through her bedroom window. Tom shook his head, tossing leaves into a pile. Lily had her mother's imagination, always spinning stories. But she'd been quiet lately, her usual chatter replaced by long stares out the window. That morning, over pancakes, she'd whispered, "The seesaw hums, Dad, like it's singing to me." Tom laughed it off, blaming her late-night comic books. But her wide blue eyes stayed with him, uneasy and searching. He glanced at the seesaw now, its faded green paint chipped. One end dipped low like an invisible kid was sitting there. He walked over, giving it a push. It moved sluggish, like it was stuck in mud, then settled back, tilted. Weird, he thought, but probably just a busted pivot. He'd fix it later. As he turned away, a low hum buzzed in his ears, faint, like a radio left on in another room. He froze, looking around. The playground was empty, kids still in school. The hum stopped, leaving only the wind. He shrugged, grabbing his rake, but his skin prickled. That evening, Tom picked Lily up from school, her backpack bouncing as she climbed into the truck. "How's my girl?" he asked, ruffling her ponytail. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "The seesaw was humming again," she said, staring at her sneakers. "I saw the boy, Dad. He waved at me." Tom's grip tightened on the wheel. "Just shadows, Lily," he said, but his voice sounded hollow. He glanced at the playground as they drove past, the seesaw's silhouette sharp against the orange sunset. For a second, it seemed to tilt, like someone had just jumped off. He blinked, and it was still. At home, their small house smelled of pine cleaner and coffee. Tom cooked spaghetti, Lily's favorite, but she barely ate, pushing noodles around her plate. "Can you check the seesaw?" she asked, her voice small. "It's not right." Tom sighed, hating how scared she looked. "I'll look tomorrow," he promised, tucking her in. But as he turned off her light, he saw her sketchbook open on the floor. The page showed a boy, thin and pale, sitting on a seesaw, his eyes black smudges. Tom's stomach twisted. He closed the book, telling himself it was just a kid's drawing. That night, Tom woke to a creak at 3 a.m. He grabbed a flashlight, heart pounding, and found Lily in the living room, staring out the window toward the park. "He's there," she whispered, her breath fogging the glass. Tom looked, but the street was dark, the playground too far to see. He carried her back to bed, her body stiff. "Just a dream," he said, but his hands shook as he locked the front door. The next morning, Tom called Ellen, the school counselor who'd helped Lily after her mom died. Ellen was 40, with a warm smile and a knack for listening. She met him at the diner, her coffee steaming as he told her about Lily's stories. "She's not herself," he said, rubbing his neck. "Keeps talking about a boy and that seesaw. Says it hums." Ellen frowned, stirring her coffee. "Kids pick up on things. Maybe there's a story behind that playground. Want me to look into it?" Tom nodded, grateful. He spent the day at the park, tightening bolts on the swings, but his eyes kept drifting to the seesaw. Around noon, he touched it, and the metal was cold, like it had been in a freezer. The hum came again, louder, vibrating in his chest. He yanked his hand back, heart racing. That evening, Ellen called. "Found something?" she said, her voice tight. "The playground's on land where an orphanage burned in 1924. A dozen kids died. The seesaw was added later, maybe a memorial." Tom's mouth went dry. "Anything else?" "A matron, Clara Hayes, ran the place," Ellen said. "People said she was strange, did rituals to protect the kids after the fire. I'm checking town records for more." Tom hung up, his mind spinning. That night, Lily was worse. She hummed a tune he didn't know, her eyes distant, sitting by her window. He locked her sketchbook away, but when he checked on her at midnight, she was gone. Panic hit him like a punch. He ran outside, flashlight sweeping the street, and found her at the playground, standing by the seesaw, humming. The seesaw tilted slowly, like someone was on the other end. "Lily!" he shouted, grabbing her. She blinked, confused, like she didn't know how she got there. The next day, Tom and Ellen met at the town hall, a dusty building with creaky floors. They found a box of orphanage records, including a letter from Clara Hayes. "The children are restless," she wrote. "I bound them to the seesaw, so they'd never leave. They need a friend." The words chilled Tom. The seesaw wasn't broken, it was haunted. Ellen suggested a cleansing ritual, something she'd read about in old books. "Salt, prayers, maybe fire," she said. "It might free them." Tom wasn't sure he believed in ghosts, but for Lily, he'd try anything. They went to the playground at dusk, the air thick with the smell of rain. The seesaw stood alone, its hum now a low drone, like a swarm of bees. Tom poured a circle of salt around it, his hands shaking. Ellen held a candle, reading a prayer from a tattered book. "Spirits of the lost, find peace," she said, her voice steady. The hum grew louder, the seesaw tilting wildly, though no one touched it. Tom's flashlight caught a shape. A boy, pale and thin, sitting on one end. His black eyes locked on Lily, who stood nearby, humming. "No!" Tom yelled, pulling her back. The boy's shadow stretched, reaching for her, and the air turned freezing, frost creeping up the seesaw's metal. Ellen shouted, "Keep going! Tom grabbed a can of lighter fluid, spraying it on the seesaw. He flicked a match, and flames roared up, the boy's shadow twisting in the fire. The hum became a scream, high and awful, shaking the ground. Lily clutched Tom's arm, her humming stopped. The seesaw buckled, the metal snapping, and the scream faded. The flames died, leaving a pile of ash and twisted steel. Tom held Lily tight, her sobs warm against his chest. The air felt lighter, the playground silent. A month later, the town tore down the playground, replacing it with a community garden. Tom and Lily moved to a new house, closer to the school. Lily was herself again, drawing flowers and dogs, her smile back. Tom took up carpentry, leaving park work behind. He thought it was over, the nightmares gone. But one evening, as he watered the garden's new roses, he heard a faint hum, like a radio buried deep in the soil. He froze, telling himself it was the wind. That night, Lily slept soundly, but Tom found her humming the same strange tune in her dreams, her fingers twitching like she was balancing on a seesaw. He never told her about the hum, or the shadow he swore he saw in the garden's dirt, thin and pale, watching from the roses. Laura Bennett adjusted the lens of her Canon camera, the Colorado air crisp as she framed a shot of the playground at dusk. It was 1998, and Laura, 28, was visiting her sister in the quiet suburb of Pineview for the summer. A photographer with a knack for capturing the overlooked, she found herself drawn to the playground's climbing frame, its rusted bars glinting under the fading sun. Her nephew, Owen, 9 and full of energy, had been her guide around town, but today he hung back, kicking dirt near the swings. "That thing's weird," he said, pointing at the climbing frame. "It changes shape at night." Laura laughed, thinking he was joking, but his hazel eyes were serious, fixed on the metal bars like they might move. Pineview was a sleepy place, all tidy lawns and station wagons, the kind of town where kids rode bikes until dark. The playground sat behind the community center, its slide faded, the swings creaking in the breeze. Laura had played here as a kid during visits, but the climbing frame felt new, out of place, its bars twisted in odd angles. She snapped a photo, the shutter clicking, and lowered the camera. For a second, the bars seemed to bend, forming a shape like outstretched hands. She blinked, and they were still just rusty metal. Probably the light, she told herself, but her skin prickled. At dinner, Owen was quiet, poking at his macaroni. Laura's sister, Karen, was at work, so Laura tried to cheer him up. "What's with the climbing frame?" she asked, passing him the milk. Owen shrugged, his voice low. "There's a lady. She watches me from it. Her eyes are black." Laura's fork paused. Kids made up stories, but Owen's hands shook as he spoke. "I don't want to go back," he added, staring at his plate. Laura forced a smile, saying it was just his imagination, but her stomach twisted. She remembered the bars, the way they'd seemed to shift. That night, Laura developed her photos in Karen's basement, the red light casting shadows. Most shots were normal, trees, kids, the swings, but the climbing frame photo was off. Blurry figures clung to the bars, small and smudged, like people frozen mid-climb. Her breath caught. It had to be a glitch, maybe a double exposure. She shoved the photo into a drawer, telling herself she'd check her camera. But as she climbed into bed, she heard a faint creak, like metal bending, coming from the playground a block away. She pulled the curtains shut, her heart thudding. The next morning, Laura found Owen in his room, staring out the window. "She was there again," he whispered, pointing toward the playground. "She wants me to climb." His face was pale, and Laura noticed a new drawing on his desk. A tall woman in a long dress, her eyes black circles, standing atop the climbing frame. "Okay," Laura said, her voice steady despite her unease. "Let's figure this out." She called Greg, the park manager she'd met at a barbecue. Greg was 35, gruff but kind, with a habit of fixing things nobody asked for. "Know anything about that climbing frame?" she asked when he stopped by, his boots dusty from work. Greg scratched his chin, leaning against his truck. "Been there since the 70s. Town got it cheap after some fairground shut down. Folks say it's creepy, but I never paid much mind." He paused, frowning. "There was a story, though. A lady died at that fairground, some performer. Accident, they said." Laura's pulse quickened. She told him about Owen's stories, the photo, the creaking. Greg's jaw tightened. "Let's check it out," he said, grabbing a flashlight. They walked to the playground, the afternoon sky gray with clouds. The climbing frame stood tall, its bars catching the dull light. Laura touched one, and it was cold, like ice, sending a jolt up her arm. She yanked her hand back, and Greg's flashlight beam caught something. Scratches on the metal, faint symbols like circles and lines. "What the heck?" he muttered, tracing them. Laura snapped a photo, her hands shaky. As they left, she swore the bars twitched, like fingers curling. She didn't look back. That evening, Laura and Greg hit the library, a stuffy building with sagging shelves. They found a 1936 newspaper about the fairground, a traveling show that stopped in Pineview. A performer, Madame Verna, a fortune teller, died when a tent collapsed, pinning her under steel. The article called it a freak accident, but a handwritten note in the margin read, "She cursed the land. Souls stay." Laura's mouth went dry. Greg dug deeper, finding a fairground log that listed the climbing frame as part of Verna's stage, sold off after her death. "Maybe she's still here," Greg said, half joking, but his eyes were uneasy. Back home, Owen was worse. He sat on the couch, rocking, muttering about the lady. Laura checked his room and found more drawings, all of the woman, her black eyes bigger, her dress flowing like smoke. Around midnight, she woke to footsteps. Owen was gone, his window open. Panic seized her. She ran to the playground, Greg meeting her there, his flashlight sweeping the dark. Owen stood atop the climbing frame, eyes blank, arms outstretched. The bars twisted below him, bending into shapes like hands, and a shadow loomed. A tall woman, her dress billowing, her eyes black voids. "Owen!" Laura screamed, climbing after him. The metal burned her hands with cold, and the air hummed like a chant. Greg shouted, "We gotta break it!" He'd brought a sledgehammer, swinging at the base. The bars screeched, the shadow lunging at him. Laura reached Owen, grabbing his shirt as he swayed, the woman's shadow whispering her name. "You can't have him!" Laura yelled, pulling Owen down. Greg's hammer cracked the frame's foundation, and the shadow wailed, a sound like wind through broken glass. The bars collapsed, the shadow fading into the dust. Owen blinked, sobbing in Laura's arms, the playground silent. The town demolished the playground the next week, replacing it with a skate park. Laura and Owen went back to Denver, leaving Pineview behind. Owen seemed okay, riding his bike again, his drawings now of dogs and trees. Laura burned the blurry photo, trying to forget. But one night, she developed a new roll of film, shots from the skate park's opening. In one, faint handprints marked the ramps, small and smudged, like kids climbing. She tore it up, her hands shaking. Owen never said anything, but sometimes at dusk, he'd stare toward the park, swearing he saw a lady in the distance, her dress flowing, watching him. Laura told herself it was over, but she kept her camera locked away, afraid of what the next photo might show. Kevin Morse stood in the schoolyard, the Maine wind sharp against his face, as he watched kids scatter across the playground. It was 1991, and at 32, Kevin was a third-grade teacher in the small town of Birch Cove, loved by his students for his bad jokes and endless patience. The playground was a familiar sight, swings swaying, a slide gleaming in the sun. But lately, the sandbox bothered him. His student, Hannah, a quiet 7-year-old with pigtails, had stopped playing there, saying a woman sang lullabies from the sand. Kevin thought it was a kid's story, But now, watching the sandbox, he noticed the other kids avoided it too, their laughter fading when they passed by. Birch Cove was a tight-knit place, all lobster boats and clapboard houses, where winters were long and summers smelled of pine. The playground sat behind the elementary school, its equipment worn but sturdy. Kevin had grown up here, and the sandbox had always been there, a square of weathered wood filled with fine, gray sand. He'd never thought much of it until Hannah handed him a drawing during art class. A woman with long hair, her face blank, kneeling in the sandbox. "She sings to me," Hannah said, her voice small. "She's sad." Kevin smiled, ruffling her hair, but the drawing stuck with him, its empty face eerie in the fluorescent classroom light. That afternoon, Kevin stayed late, grading papers in his classroom. The playground was empty, the sun dipping low, casting long shadows. He glanced out the window and froze. The sand in the sandbox shifted, forming patterns like footprints, though no one was there. He rubbed his eyes, blaming the late hour, but when he looked again, the patterns were gone. Shaking his head, he locked up and headed home, a small apartment above the hardware store. But as he cooked dinner, Hannah's words echoed. She said. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The next morning, Hannah was quieter, her eyes fixed on the floor. "Did you hear her?" she asked, clutching her backpack. Kevin knelt beside her. "Hear who, kiddo?" Hannah's lip trembled. "The lady. She sang all night. Said she misses her baby." Kevin's chest tightened. He told her it was just a dream, but his voice wavered. After class, he walked to the playground, the sandbox still and ordinary in the daylight. He scooped a handful of sand, and it felt cold, heavier than it should. A faint hum tickled his ears, like a lullaby half-remembered. He dropped the sand, stepping back, his heart thudding. Kevin called Clara, a retired town clerk who knew Birch Cove's history better than anyone. At 65, Clara was sharp, her house stuffed with old records and photo albums. She invited him over, pouring tea as he explained Hannah's stories. "A singing lady in the sandbox?" Clara said, raising an eyebrow. "Sounds like a ghost tale, but this town's got plenty of those." She promised to check her files, her eyes glinting with curiosity. Kevin left, feeling foolish but uneasy. That evening, he found Hannah lingering by the sandbox after school, humming a tune he didn't know. "She likes when I sing," Hannah said, her eyes distant. Kevin guided her away, his skin crawling as the sand shifted behind them, forming a faint circle. At home, Kevin couldn't sleep. Around midnight, he heard a soft hum, like a woman's voice, drifting through his open window. He grabbed a flashlight and walked to the playground, the night air thick with salt from the nearby sea. The sandbox glowed faintly, the sand swirling into shapes, handprints, small and delicate. He blinked, and they vanished, but the hum grew louder, wrapping around him. He ran home, locking the door, telling himself it was the wind. But the next day, Hannah's humming was worse, the lullaby constant. Her hands smudged with gray sand, though she hadn't been near the playground. Clara called that afternoon, her voice tense. "Found something," she said. In 1883, a woman named Mary Wells lived by a creek where the playground is now. She drowned her baby there, then herself after her husband left. Folks said she was mad with grief. There's a story she cursed the land, wanting her child back. Kevin's stomach dropped. Clara added, "I found coins in an old box, etched with symbols, buried near that creek. Might be tied to her." Kevin drove to her house, and she showed him the coins, small and tarnished, their markings like waves and eyes. He took one, its weight cold in his pocket. That night, Kevin checked on Hannah at her parents' house, a cozy place down the street. She was in her room, humming, her eyes glassy. Her mother, Lisa, was worried. "She's not sleeping," Lisa said. "Keeps singing that song." Kevin promised to fix it, though he didn't know how. Back at the playground, he stood by the sandbox, the coin heavy in his hand. The sand moved again, forming a woman's face, her mouth open like she was singing. He stumbled back, the hum now a wail, loud and mournful. He called Clara, who suggested a ritual. "Salt and sage," she said. "Old way to break a curse." They met at the playground at dusk, the sky heavy with clouds. Clara brought a bag of salt and a bundle of sage, her hands steady. Kevin poured salt around the sandbox, the grains catching the fading light. Clara lit the sage, its smoke curling upward, and chanted, "Mary Wells, let go. Your child is at peace." The sand churned, the hum turning to a scream, sharp and desperate. Kevin's flashlight caught a shadow, a woman, her hair long and tangled, rising from the sand. Her eyes were black, her arms reaching for Hannah, who stood nearby, humming, drawn from her house. "Hannah!" Kevin shouted, running to her. The shadow wailed, the sand swirling like a storm. Clara threw more salt, shouting, "Be gone!" Kevin grabbed a shovel, digging into the sandbox, desperate to break whatever held the spirit. The sand was cold, clinging to his hands, and he found more coins, their symbols glowing faintly. The shadow lunged, her fingers brushing Hannah's hair. Kevin swung the shovel, scattering the sand, and the shadow screamed, dissolving into the air. Hannah collapsed, sobbing, the hum gone. Clara burned the coins in the sage's flame, their metal hissing. The sandbox was still, the sand ordinary again. Kevin carried Hannah home, her breathing soft, her humming stopped. The town filled the sandbox with concrete the next month, turning the playground into a picnic area with tables and benches. Kevin took a leave from teaching, spending time with Hannah, who was back to her old self, drawing cats and stars. He buried the memory of the shadow, the coins, the hum, telling himself it was over. But one night, he walked by the picnic area, the new tables gleaming under streetlights. A faint hum drifted from the concrete, like a lullaby sung underwater. He froze, his breath catching. At home, he found a coin on his doorstep, the symbols glowing in the dark. Hannah never mentioned the lady again, but sometimes, in her sleep, she hummed that same sad tune, her fingers tracing circles like sand in the air. Kevin threw the coin into the sea, but he never walked by the picnic area again, afraid of what might still be singing beneath the stone. Maggie Sullivan pushed her glasses up her nose, the Iowa wind tugging at her scarf as she watched her students play in the schoolyard. It was 1994, and at 29, Maggie was a new librarian at the elementary school in Maple Grove, a small town of cornfields and picket fences. The playground was the heart of the school, with a slide, swings, and a set of monkey bars that gleamed dull under the October sun. But lately, the monkey bars worried her. Her favorite student, 8-year-old Sophie, a shy girl with braids, had stopped crossing them, saying they whispered her name. Maggie thought it was just nerves, but now, standing by the playground, she noticed other kids gave the monkey bars a wide berth, their giggles fading as they passed. Maple Grove was the kind of place where folks left doors unlocked and kids played until dusk. The playground was old, its equipment weathered but loved. The monkey bars a lattice of chipped blue paint and rusted bolts. Maggie had moved here from Chicago, craving quiet after a messy breakup, and the librarian job felt like a fresh start. Sophie's stories started as cute, whispers in the wind, she said, but they'd grown darker. During story time, Sophie handed Maggie a drawing. A man in a long coat, his face a blur, hanging from the monkey bars like a shadow. "He talks to me," Sophie whispered, her brown eyes wide. "He's lonely." Maggie smiled, tucking the drawing away, but her hands felt cold. That afternoon, Maggie stayed late in the library, shelving books under flickering lights. The playground was empty, the sky bruised with clouds. She glanced out the window and froze. The monkey bar's shadows stretched too long, forming a shape like a man swaying. She blinked, and it was gone, just metal and dust. Her heart raced, but she told herself it was the clouds playing tricks. At home, her tiny apartment smelled of coffee and old paper. She tried to read, But Sophie's drawing kept creeping into her mind, the man's blurry face staring. Around midnight, she heard a faint whisper, like a voice calling her name, drifting from the school a block away. She shut her window, her pulse loud in her ears. The next morning, Sophie was quieter, clutching her backpack in the library. "He whispered again," she said, her voice small. "Says he needs a friend." Maggie's stomach nodded. She knelt beside her. "It's just your imagination, okay?" But Sophie shook her head, pointing to the playground. "He's there now." Maggie looked, but the monkey bars stood still, their bars glinting in the sun. After school, she walked to the playground, the air chilly. She touched the monkey bars, and they were freezing, the cold biting her fingers. A whisper brushed her ear, her name, soft and raspy. She yanked her hand back, her breath short, and noticed scratches on the metal, faint symbols like crosses and loops. Maggie called Frank, a retired history teacher who'd helped her settle into town. At 60, Frank was gruff but kind, with a basement full of town archives. She met him at his house, a cluttered place with creaky floors, and told him about Sophie's stories. "Whispers from the monkey bars?" Frank said, scratching his bald head. "Sounds like a ghost story, but Maple Grove's got a few of those." He promised to dig through his records, his eyes curious. Maggie left, feeling silly but rattled. That evening, she found Sophie lingering by the monkey bars after school, staring up at them, her lips moving like she was talking. "He's nice," Sophie said when Maggie approached, her voice dreamy. Maggie pulled her away, her skin crawling as the bars seemed to creak, though there was no wind. At home, Maggie couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., she heard the whisper again, louder, like a man's voice outside her window. She grabbed a flashlight and walked to the playground, the night thick with fog. The monkey bars loomed, their shadows twisting into shapes. Arms, hands, a face. The whispers grew, a chorus of her name, circling her. She ran home, locking the door, her hands shaking. The next day, Sophie was worse, her eyes glassy, whispering back to something Maggie couldn't hear. During lunch, Maggie found a new drawing in Sophie's cubby. The man, his coat longer, his blurry face smiling, the monkey bars bending around him like a cage. Frank called that afternoon, his voice low. "Found something," he said. In 1890, a drifter named Samuel Klein was hanged on that land, before the school was built. He'd been stealing from farms, but some said he was into dark stuff, rituals, charms. Locals thought he cursed the ground when he died. The monkey bars went up in the 60s, right over that spot. Maggie's mouth went dry. Frank added, "I found a locket in my archives, engraved with those symbols you mentioned. Might be his." Maggie drove to his house, and he handed her the locket, small and tarnished, its markings matching the scratches on the bars. Felt heavy, like it carried a weight beyond metal. That night, Maggie checked on Sophie at her parents' house, a neat bungalow nearby. Sophie was in her room, whispering, her hands smudged with playground dirt. Her father, Tom, was worried. "She's not herself," he said. "Keeps talking to someone." Maggie promised to fix it, though her heart sank. Back at the playground, she stood by the monkey bars, the locket cold in her pocket. The whispers were louder, a man's voice, raspy and pleading. The bars creaked, bending slightly, and a shadow formed. A man in a long coat, his face a blur, hanging from the bars. Maggie stumbled back, the whispers chanting her name. She called Frank, who suggested a ritual. "Salt and ash," he said. "Old way to break a curse." They met at the playground at dusk, the air heavy with the smell of rain. Frank brought a bag of salt and a jar of fireplace ash, his hand steady. Maggie poured salt around the monkey bars, the grains glowing faintly in the twilight. Frank scattered ash, chanting, "Samuel Klein, your time is done. Rest now." The bars shook, the whispers turning to a howl, low and angry. Maggie's flashlight caught the shadow, its arms reaching for Sophie, who stood nearby, whispering, drawn from her house. "Sophie!" Maggie screamed, running to her. The shadow loomed, its fingers brushing Sophie's braids. Frank shouted, "Keep going!" Maggie grabbed a crowbar, swinging at the monkey bar's base. The metal screeched, the shadow lunging at her. She dropped the locket into the salt, and Frank lit a match, the ash catching fire. The shadow wailed, a sound like breaking glass, and the bars collapsed, the shadow fading into the smoke. Sophie blinked, sobbing in Maggie's arms, the whispers gone. Frank kicked the locket into the dirt, its symbols dull. The playground was still, the air warm again. Maggie carried Sophie home, her breathing soft, her whispering stopped. The town tore down the playground the next month, replacing it with a baseball field. Maggie took a new job in a nearby town, leaving Maple Grove behind. Sophie was herself again, reading books and laughing with friends. Maggie burned the drawing, trying to forget the shadow, the whispers. But one evening, she visited the baseball field, the new grass bright under floodlights. A faint whisper drifted from the dirt, like a man's voice calling her name. She froze, her breath catching. At home, she found Sophie's latest drawing, slipped under her door. A man in a long coat, his face still blurry, standing on a field. Maggie tore it up, her hands trembling. Sophie never mentioned the man again, but sometimes, at night, she'd hum a strange tune, her fingers moving like she was climbing bars, and Maggie wondered if Samuel's whisper was still out there, waiting in the dust.